WPSU is your source for Penn State sports, Penn State research, Penn State community. But we can't do it without your support. Make a contribution today and get a DVD of your favorite Penn State show.
I do some consulting work on American
feeling in the room was
You don't ever say to her that
one about the Chautauqua Incident.
Introductory
discussion on the ethical
we left.
more of a community.
Before China took back over.
currently doing in autism.
He's been called one of the world's foremost advocates for freedom and justice. Randall Robinson, a best-selling author, activist, and founder of TransAfrica, is now a distinguished scholar in residence at Penn State's Dickinson School of Law. His efforts have contributed to such pivotal events as the end of apartheid in South Africa and the restoration of Haiti's first democratically elected government. Robinson has been awarded 19 honorary doctorates and numerous humanitarian awards from the UN, the Congressional Black Caucus, and the King Center, among others. Here's our conversation with Randall Robinson. Randall Robinson, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
You are a lawyer, a best-selling author, an activist, founder of TransAfrica, and are probably best known for your work to end apartheid in South Africa. Today, you're a distinguished scholar in residence in Penn State's Dickinson School of Law and School of International Affairs. Why Penn State? What attracted you to this position?
The dean of the school, Phil McConaughey, invited me to come and speak at Dickinson more than 10 years ago. I was at the Carlisle campus. And a few years back, a couple of years ago, he called me in St. Kitts and asked if I'd like to teach. I'd never thought about it, never taught before. And I told him I'd seriously considered it. I would consider it. I had an enormous respect for him and a great friendship with him that began when I was here the first time. And I told him if I would do it if I could not have to move from St. Kitts. And he said he thought we could work with that. And so I come up several times a semester, 3 or 4 times a semester, and the rest I do via teleconference, talking to my classes on the 2 campuses, Carlisle and here at University Park. And so it's been a great experience for me. Second career at my age, I've enjoyed it, and the students have been invigorating. It's been great for me.
How does it dovetail with a lifelong interest in improving the lives of blacks, not just in the United States, but in Africa and in Caribbean nations?
Well, I'm teaching a course in human rights, and we're talking about the international human rights system and the major covenants that have been passed and ratified by the countries of the world, and the extent to which we have compliance and don't have compliance, where we have enforcement and where we should have greater enforcement that would produce more compliance. And so I think we're learning about the human rights global project and our responsibility for it as citizens of a global community, and what we do and how we do it to protect the rights of people all over the world. And that's what we're doing, and I'm teaching a seminar on that, and the exchange is between the students and me is fascinating.
Now, you mentioned human rights conventions and treaties. Many of them are signed by 180 nations or more and not by the United States. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, the United States has, after World War II, together with the great powers, with Great Britain and with the Soviet Union, joined by China and lastly France, they won the war, and they installed the system. They installed an economic system. They installed the human rights regime. Eleanor Roosevelt was principally responsible for the passage of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Her husband, of course, pushed these things through at the conference to produce the United Nations. But we were installing a system that we thought we weren't required to comply with. We were expecting other nations to comply with it, and of course the other nations that were there weren't always forthcoming about what their real agendas were. The British, of course, had a great colonial empire. They didn't want to relinquish that. The Soviets were only interested in the states on their western border, that they were prepared and did go on to gobble up, so to speak, Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, and to dominate those. The U.S. was interested in global markets to trade with through its new system, and so sought the decolonization of countries that areas that weren't represented in San Francisco for this conference. And so it's important to remember only 50 states came. There were only 50 invitees, those nations that had declared war against Germany and Japan. 250 million people were under colonial systems. And Churchill said, "Not one scrap of British property will I surrender." The U.S. wanted it surrendered, but not for the rights of the people who were colonized, largely for trade purposes. And so everybody was there representing their own interest, and one has to remember that their humanitarian interest and then their a special private and more nearly commercial interests that states have that sometimes take precedence over human rights interests. And I think that had a great deal to do with all of the nations at the time that were in positions to dominate the post-war world, and the U.S. was one of those nations. And so we felt that we didn't have to comply with a standard that we, and only we, could enforce. We were the leaders of the world, and no one could enforce those standards against us.
In fact, you've said the United States wants to measure other nations with one yardstick, and in America with another.
For instance, on capital punishment, virtually the entire world is moving away from capital punishment. China, the United States, Iraq, Iran carry out more than 90% of the executions now carried out in the world. African nations, Latin nations, Asian nations are moving away from capital punishment. The U.S., led by the state of Texas, hews to that course, stubbornly and steadfastly. It's against the spirit of the Human Rights Project, but the United States persists in doing that.
And why do you think so?
I don't know. One has to do with issues of sovereignty. The Europeans understanding that democracy can sometimes produce an unfortunate result, as it did in the case of Adolf Hitler. I think that there needs to be something above the nation state to which these countries should have to account. An international system of human rights, a multilateral court of human rights. The U.S. believes
an international court which we haven't signed on to.
The International Criminal Court. We did everything we could to defeat it, and that's to bring rogues and criminals who've committed horrific crimes to book before the court that virtually every nation in the world signed on to, except the United States and a handful of others. And as a matter of fact, the Clinton administration did everything it could and was successful in weakening the court and still refusing to sign on to it, to ratify it. As a matter of fact, Clinton signed but didn't ratify, but Bush unsigned. And so the U.S. stands virtually alone in opposition to the court.
You mentioned Clinton, and Clinton is one of these figures who is embraced by the African American community. You voted for him in '92 and said that there's Clinton the candidate and Clinton the president. Tell us a little bit about why you turned out to be so disappointed by Clinton.
Well, I think first of all, I think he's brilliant. I think he's He's a gifted politician. I think he stands for very little in the area of human rights and the concerns about humanity. He has represented, for instance, in a country like Haiti, the cause of sweatshop owners, the very wealthy Haitians who exploit people who work in their sweatshops, and people who have denied them 63 cent per hour increase in their wages so that they can at least cover their lunch and transportation costs to and from work. Clinton has located himself on that side. But generally, when he was in office, it is very difficult to find, to identify anything quantifiably good that he did for the put-upon world community. In Rwanda, he and Secretary of State Madeleine Albright opposed the intervention of UN troops that might have stemmed the awful tragedy that occurred if there had been any U.S. leadership at all. He opposed it. And this is the price that we've seen. But I think because we don't get information of this sort in the United States, the American public is none the wiser. And there's no political cost for what he did and what he didn't do.
You say we've been bamboozled, really, by his saxophone playing and his knowledge of gospel music.
With a white community, with a black community, yes. I recall him at Maynard Jackson's funeral. Maynard Jackson had been the mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, the first black mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, and he was a revered man, and Clinton went to the funeral and was rapturously received, and he said, "You know why, to this audience, you know why black people love me, and it's because I love black people." It was absolutely shameless, but. One has to look, when one votes for somebody, how one makes them account to us for what they do or don't do. And that means we have to be able to follow things. And we're not being Democrats, good Democrats, little d, good Democrats, unless we understand that beyond the ritual of voting, what is required of us, and voting is just a ritual. Democracy requires us to be enlightened citizens, that we have to know something about the world, and we have to know something about public policy to cause those who we would send to Washington to represent us to do it responsibly.
I want to know a little bit about what made you want to know, because you write in your autobiography, the twig is bent early and keeps its shape throughout. And I'm wondering what sparked your lifelong interest in politics and human rights. What shaped you in your Richmond childhood?
We're probably all shaped by experience. The Africans have a proverb that the axe forgets but not the tree. And I think it's a very telling proverb that it doesn't make any difference. One can look at the various criteria by which people make the decision to discriminate against other human beings. Could be ethnicity, could be nationality, could be religious persuasion, it could be a sexual orientation, could be race. Of course, in my case, it was race, and once wounded, one doesn't want that to happen to anybody else. But it certainly means more and has a more lasting effect to the wounded than it does to those who do the wounding. And so my human rights work was inspired by my early life experience. I mean, this was American apartheid, and I was shaped by it. And so I think it has a lot to do with how I decided to spend my professional life.
In Defending the Spirit, your 1999 autobiography, you describe yourself as obsessively black. Race is an overarching aspect of my identity. America has made me this way, or more accurately, white Americans have made me this way.
Well, I don't think we've taken full account in America. And I don't say this to make a charge. In many ways, I think most individuals are not responsible for what they've evolved to be and how they have evolved to think about things. I don't think we know enough about ourselves and each other to appreciate all that has happened to black people. First, one can talk fairly knowledgeably about segregation, slavery, and the sort of de jure discrimination that we have experienced in the United States. But the larger crime is what happened to black people before them, the sort of eradication of their memory of themselves. You can't begin to appreciate the social cost of that until you know what happened. By way of comparative analysis, I went to a bat mitzvah for a dear Jewish friend of mine in Washington some years ago. His 13-year-old daughter was coming of age, and of course this is the occasion and the age beyond which a Jewish child is constrained to obey the commandments. And I saw this assemblage in the synagogue of some 300 people, and his daughter and her daughter read from the Torah, and many encouraging speeches were made, and there was this great applause, and the child was the center of all of this. And I thought to myself, because there are ceremonies like this in West African religions, what a great cost it had been to African Americans to have lost their religions, to have lost their names, to have lost memory of their culture, to have lost all memory of what happened in Africa's antiquity. That by comparison, my Jewish friends had available to them intact. They had their religion, they had their language, they had their culture, looking back to the age of Moses. We didn't know. I remember talking to my mother. My mother was having cataract surgery. And when she was in her mid-70s, and she said to me, she said, "Randall, I hope this goes well." I said, "Well, it should go fine. It's an ancient procedure." And I said they were doing it in Timbuktu. She said, "Timbuktu, the only thing that Americans knew about Timbuktu was from the expression from here to Timbuktu. Didn't even know it was a place." Of course, Timbuktu was the venue of the great university at Sankara, which was built before the Moors built the first university in Europe in Salamanca, Spain, when the Moors conquered Spain, the Moors out of Africa. And so Timbuktu was there, and this surgery was performed in Timbuktu at the hospital, at the university, in 1405.
And Randall Robinson would know that.
Well, the point is the research and the academic work on this is so obscure in America. But it is well known.
So much though, right. This is what I'm saying.
And so you've hidden a people's own history from them. And that is debilitating. People write history because they need history. People design, make, and cultivate cultures because we need cultures, because we are extensions of what we were. But if you can't remember it.
You talked a moment ago about, you know, if you're going to vote, you need to be responsive about what you're voting for. You need to know something. And blacks and whites don't know so much that they're voting for. How do you get Americans to want to know? And then once you get them to want to know, where do you direct them? Because so much of what is available in the popular press is not going to educate you very much.
Well, two things I want to say about that. One is anecdotal. I remember at one of the inaugural balls at Beyonce was saying about President Obama that when she saw him, she said, "I want to be smarter," and she cried. That we don't see often in the public square sort of exemplars of this kind of black excellence as much as we would see Snoop Dogg. And I think that's by design. You have African American students, Hispanic students, and students from other communities at all of our major universities doing sterling work at Penn State, at MIT, at Harvard, and Howard, schools like these. But you don't get them represented as a slice of life in the public place in the way that you get other less healthy things represented. And so people don't see often enough models. One of the things that has perished in the black experience in America is the strength of a black family. And when you don't have the sort of private unit of support, if you don't have that to surround and protect you, then you need public models that encourage and comfort you and tell you that everything is possible. I am what I am because they were what they were. But when you don't know, there was a they and there was a time, then you have little to emulate. And I think we don't see that in the public place. I just don't think television has been healthy or a good idea.
And what do you attribute that to? Why is that the case?
It's commercial, it's money. It drives the business. It drives television, it drives movies, it drives the news industry. It certainly drives cable.
And what about BET?
Oh, it's just terrible, awful money. It just doesn't keep that. As I was telling you before we started our discussion, that I see BBC in St. Kitts, and on Sunday they have a program, a discussion program, where they discuss public affairs. And on the program, they normally have an American and a Brit and someone from Germany, someone from France, someone from Asia, someone from the Arab world, someone from Africa, so that you never discuss an issue without
everyone at the table.
Everyone at the table. That never occurs to Americans. Isn't it? The amazing thing and the troubling thing is that it never occurs to them that you don't have represented the affected people.
When you founded TransAfrica, was it 97 or 77?
Yes.
1977, you founded TransAfrica. And some African Americans felt your energies were going to help blacks in Africa and in Caribbean nations, and there was some criticism that there was need for more help here. How did you feel about that? And,
Well,
and Why do you believe that African Americans and Africans in general are still so connected?
It's a part of the damage. First of all, to the extent that they are not connected, it's a part of the damage. Just think, just by way of example, an illustration. You take a people and you rip them from their roots, and you pack them like sardines on a ship, and you bring them over. And like sardines, because there are no fish in the sea named sardines, sardines only become sardines once they're put in a can. And Africans only became Negroes when they were stuffed onto slave ships. The name was invented to cleave us from Africa, to disassociate us, to cut us off, to give us a new name, a name that it didn't even faintly suggest the previous experience, our names, our families, our lines, our religions, our cultures, none of that. We were completely severed from. And so that damaged a lot of people. And then Africa was characterized disparagingly. For instance, probably the only Egyptian leader of the dynastic age that Americans could name would be Cleopatra. She came latest in the line. She was largely of Greek ancestry, and she built nothing. But the Great Pyramids were built 5,000 years ago, first by Pharaoh Nama, who was black, in Cheops, who was black. Now this is discussed in National Geographic. It's clearly the case that has been proven, but Americans know nothing about it. And so you see when you do this kind of damage to people who have no access to their own story, and they have to read what's been given to them to read by others, information that disparages them, they lose an appreciation for themselves.
Well,
then we say, well, what do we have to do with Africa?
Speaking of information that's provided to them to read, I think of Parade Magazine's Worst Dictators edition, which comes out, it seems, every year. 2009, of the top 10 worst dictators in the world, 3 of them are from Africa. And to some extent, the publication of that, I think, perpetuates the stereotype of Africa as dangerous and corrupt and uncivilized. I'm wondering what you make of not only that article, but of how those dictators came to power.
First, it's of a piece with what I've discussed. Many of these so-called dictators were in the service of American interest during the Cold War. And of course, publicly, that wasn't talked about. For instance, at the end of colonialism, when the Congo was about to elect Patrice Lumumba, Dwight David Eisenhower approved the plan to have him assassinated because he was for a fuller independence than we were prepared to tolerate. We saw Congo as having a strategic value to us, and we imposed Mobutu on these people. And he was a kleptocrat who stole the country blind for 30, 40 years. He was our guy, you see, but we charged him to Africa's account, but we imposed him on the Congo. We've done that in several cases. That's how we know. What we think we know is not right, and what there is to know, we don't know at all. And that has happened too terribly many times. And we don't know the commonplaces about Africa. I lived in Tanzania.
Why Tanzania, by the way? Because that was the first country you visited in
Julius
Africa.
Nyerere was a great beacon for many of us at the time. He was Mwalimu in Swahili. He was the teacher. He had taught school. And he was a man of impeccable integrity, a brilliant man who created an example of democracy that has survived intact in Tanzania since independence. And so we went there because many of us from America at the time, just as many when Ghana became independent in 1957, went to Ghana to support Nkrumah. Because that was a kind of beacon to many African Americans. I went to Tanzania and I learned so much. First of all, I wanted to do a book on Dar es Salaam to show in America photos of an African city, beautiful African city that Americans knew nothing about because they perhaps even ahead of Cleopatra in terms of American celebrity. The best known person who was said to have been in Africa was Tarzan. I mean, Americans don't know this. Many Americans think Africa is a country.
It's 52 countries.
Yes, 3 3/4 times the size of the United States. They know nothing about it. And these are countries with cities in which people live in houses and their children go to schools and go to university, as I used to go out to the University of Dar es Salaam all the time to shop in supermarkets, do the things that Americans do. But they don't have the faintest idea because of this this wide, opaque border of prejudice that we've thrown up around ourselves and against other people across the world.
You might have stayed in Tanzania, I suspect, except that you felt that you could do more for blacks in Africa and in the United States by coming back to the U.S.
I thought that, yes, and I thought I wanted to come back and do what I did. I wanted to form an organization to begin to mobilize American policy in the right direction. In the last analysis, African Americans had come to the United States under unfortunate circumstances, but we were American citizens in a country that was the most powerful country in the world, and therefore we had a responsibility to try to make our country's deeds comport with its notions of how it ought to behave itself, and so and that's what I did. I came back and went to work in the Congress for a while, and then formed Trans-Africa, and then the anti-apartheid movement and all of the other work that we did.
And in fact, many would say that it was you and Trans-Africa that are largely responsible for the sanctions that resulted in the ending of apartheid in South Africa. Do South Africans have a sense of the role that African Americans played in their freedom?
I don't know. Clearly some do. Certainly the leadership does. The last time I was there, I met with President Thabo Mbeki, and he was involved with us at the time. And I've spent some time with former President Mandela. I went with Bill Cosby to visit him, and he took us over to Robben Island to visit his prison cell and all of that sort of thing. And so I think there's some appreciation. How far it goes down into South African society, the knowledge of that, I have no way of knowing.
He spent 28 years in prison, Mandela, and it makes me think of, I think you spent 28 days after the work you did in South Africa on a hunger strike to influence U.S. policy toward Haiti.
Again, it was President Clinton who was rounding up Haitians who were fleeing the tyranny of Haiti's military dictatorship that was armed by Clinton and previous American administrations, fleeing into the waters, trying to make their way to Florida, a long way away, with only a 50% chance of surviving. And I went on the hunger strike to force the president to treat Haitians as we treated other refugees. We are constrained by human rights law. to determine whether they are fleeing with a well-founded fear of persecution. If they are, then we're required by international law to give them a place to be, a safe place to be. Clinton wasn't doing that. He was rounding them up and sending them back to their deaths. And when it became clear to him that I was prepared to die, I didn't want to die, but I was prepared to, that he decided, I think, because of the publicity it had generated, that he would relent and have his people screened as every other nation screens refugees to see if they have if they are legitimate political refugees. He wasn't doing that, and he was violating international law. And the irony is that this was a president that African Americans
voted for. And without African Americans, he might not have been elected.
He would never become president. No chance. He would never become president.
You left Trans-Africa as the president in 2001 when you left to St. Kitts. Tell us about the work that Trans-Africa does today, and are you involved in any way in it?
Some of this, no, I'm not. I think the greatest value that a former head can have to the organization that he or she is leaving is to leave it alone. To let the new leader do what the person wants to do, and I've done that. Although I have discussions, and I've gone back for a book signing that Trans-Africa so graciously held for me, and so I have a good relationship, but not direct involvement. No.
Over the years, you've been recognized with, I think, 19 honorary doctorates. You've been recognized by the Congressional Black Caucus, by the Martin Luther King Center for Nonviolence, to name many, many others. I'm wondering, when you look back at the work that you've done over the last 30 plus years, what are you most proud of?
I don't, first of all, I don't do a lot of looking back. It means a great deal to me when I'm doing something, but the work all seems to be a hit, and very little of it behind. That's done, and I'm as proud of some things I failed at as some things I succeeded at. I remember when we were doing the South Africa demonstrations. When you do these things, you have no reason to expect any success at all. It's like drilling for oil. You drill a lot of holes, and most of them will be dry, but you keep trying, and that's relentlessness is the quality you need.
And in the case of South Africa, we're talking decades.
We had worked on this for a long time, and I got this idea that we ought to go to the embassy and refuse to leave. And I called Mary Frances Berry, who was the head of a member of a Civil Rights Commission. And I called Walter Fauntleroy, who was a delegate in the Congress from D.C., and Eleanor Holmes Norton, who is now in the Congress from D.C. And I said, I think we should go to the embassy and meet with the ambassador and refuse to leave and tell him we want to talk about the issues, and refused to leave. We chose the day before Thanksgiving, which we thought was a slow news day. And
so they would cover it.
So that they would cover it, and we got there. And he thought it was going swimmingly because we were talking, and he was lecturing on us about how all the progress they were making in South Africa towards good race relations, and of course they were making none. And then he got word in the meeting that the press was forming outside saying the people inside meeting with him were not going to leave. And he came in ashen-faced and said he had called the State Department, and we said we knew he only had three choices. He would either have us unceremoniously dumped on the lawn, or he would lock up the embassy and have us left in there without heat or electricity for the holiday, or he would have us arrested. And I think his South African preparation had schooled him in the wrong direction, and he came back in. He said, if you don't leave now, I'm going to have you all arrested. And we said to ourselves, there is a God.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And he did that, and that sparked demonstrations that put 5,000 people in jail in front of that embassy, and working with the Congress under the leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus on the House side, and notably Senator Ted Kennedy on the Senate side, and a Republican, special Republican like Lowell Weicker from Connecticut, who volunteered to get himself arrested, the first U.S. senator to ever do anything like that. We were able to work together to produce these sanctions over the veto of President Reagan. And that sparked sanctions around the world, and coupled with what Mandela and the ANC were doing in South Africa, brought about the downfall of the apartheid system. But on the other hand, I'd gone to the Ethiopian embassy to protest and refuse to leave, at the same time protesting left-wing tyranny under Mengistu in Ethiopia.
And it got no attention.
No attention at all. It got me chained to the jail wall in a sweltering cell in D.C., and no attention at all. But it didn't matter whether it was left or right, whether the government was black or white. Wrong was always wrong. And we all always tried to understand what wrong was and to stand against it. And I guess I'm proudest of being consistent in that. It didn't matter so much what the public thought we had succeeded in. It's what we felt inside we had tried to do and how we had stood by what we believed in.
Nelson Mandela acknowledged, obviously, the work that Trans-Africa did to end apartheid in South Africa. But when it was all said and done, he embraced many of the organizations and people that fought you tooth and nail in your efforts to bring sanctions against South Africa. How hard was that to deal with, and have amends been made between the two of you over that?
No, we had no falling out over that. We had differences, but not over that, and really not worth discussing now. Nelson Mandela was and is a great leader, and a remarkable political leader. He's a sort of a confluence of strength and charm and brilliance and all of that. He had, and politicians make choices. And of course, it's the business of compromise and trade-offs. And so there was a Nelson Mandela of his years of imprisonment and before, and what he has stood for bravely and courageously. And then he became president, and of course that requires of you something different. And so all presidents have those challenges to face. You see, I'm not a politician. I think if I were one, I'd be a terrible one.
Well, actually, and you tell it like it is. In fact, Bill Cosby and others wrote about your book, Defending the Spirit, that it's something that all Americans should read. And you talk boldly and truthfully in the face of power, and I'm wondering if there were any repercussions for that. You name names in Defending the Spirit, and you're very outspoken about things that you felt were wrong and people who did wrong.
I suppose there were repercussions, and at the same time I may not be too keenly aware of them. I've never been ambitious in the conventional way. I have everything I've always wanted, and so
I think you're referring to your wife and your kids. That's right.
I'm difficult to punish. So I knew going in that I would never be invited on to corporate boards and that sort of thing, and I never wanted that. And that's not the mark of any great unselfishness. I'm just largely a private kind of person. I don't like crowds and functions and that sort of thing. I've enjoyed my work and I've enjoyed my family.
Where are you focusing your energies now?
Oh, I'm looking at this question. My writing now is about trying to cause us to, the black community and the general community, to examine what we don't like to examine. And when I talked about having lost one's sight of one's story, there are two kinds of assaults that have been lodged against the black community over the centuries. The one we know about, and that has to do with discrimination and segregation and all that we suffered. And that's a more contemporary problem. But the larger problem has been that which we have no knowledge of at all. What happened before, how we got stripped of what a human being needs to be healthy and to be able to do all that you need to do. And that is a memory of one's culture and history and language and religion and all that sort of thing. And a memory of all of the people that had done great things, so that when one says the Queen of Sheba to you, you know that Sheba was Abyssinia, you know that Sheba was Ethiopia, that you know that Egypt, dynastic Egypt, was a consequence of Ethiopia, that you know that it was the Queen of Sheba who with Solomon bore Menelik, and is said to have brought the Ark of the Covenant home from Jerusalem to Aksum in Ethiopia, where it exists today. These things we ought to know about.
Why do they matter? Because I think
I guess they matter in the same way, and with the same sort of enthusiastic embraced and seeking as ancient Rome would matter to others who are products of that, or Rome, or European history, or that sort of thing. History matters to everybody. Culture matters to everyone. We don't do it as an optional behavior. Human beings do it because we need to. We're the only people who extrapolate the future from the past. Past is prologue. But what if you don't know what your past was? Everybody tries to know that. And if you can't, then you've been crippled. And the can't in our case was a deliberate tactic, renamed and denuded of everything that makes up the human being.
You write in your autobiography, I will die, you are convinced that, quote, I will die in a society as racially divided as the one I was born into. You also say in that book that you're not a pessimist, but a thoughtful realist. What do you think is the future of race relations in this country?
Let me put it this way. For some unfortunate reason, human beings are socialized, programmed to identify criteria. It could be race, it could be class, it could be ethnicity, it could be an accent, it could be religion, it could be, as I said, religious persuasion, it could be sexual orientation. They identify this as reason to discriminate against a various person, and once we have so labeled people, we can't see through the identification. We can't see through to the humanity of the person that we're attacking. This is a behavior of the human community. I don't think that that stops. I think one can build defenses against it, but I think it would be romantic and naive to suggest that that would simply go away.
Would reparations help? That's something you fought for quite a long time.
Indeed. You know, if we think of reparations not, let's say not for African Americans, but you select any group. Let's say you had selected all of the people in the country over 5'10", and you said for 300 years, we're going to treat these people in the worst way. We're going to take everything they have of value from them socially. And at the end of these 300 years, you're going to expect that there will be differentials of success. Obviously, slavery empowered some and pushed back others. It made some rich. It fueled and financed the British Industrial Revolution. Did the same thing in the United States. Endowed my law school, Harvard Law School. Slavery did. The sale of slaves on the island of Antigua endowed Harvard Law School. The same at Yale. And at the same time, the people who were used got nothing. And then at the end of the day, with emancipation, with this group up here wealthy and this group pushed back here poor, impoverished in every way, materially in every other way. And then they said, well, we're not going to do it anymore. Catch up. You don't catch up. You can't catch up. You were not intended to catch up. But we provide reparations to everybody else. We've done it with
Native Americans,
Japanese,
German Americans, Jewish Americans, rather.
Americans, that's right.
Germans provided that reparations.
But only where we bear, as a nation, the greatest responsibility and guilt, do we object to it as an idea, because it would cause us to look at ourselves. We don't want to do that. We are in serious denial, which we don't want to allow to countries like Turkey because of what they did in World War II. Not World War II, but around 1915, the extermination of people. And it's so easy to blame and assign it when you're outside of responsibility. But when you're inside of it, you live with denial.
There are some who say that reparations would further divide the races. There are others who say it'll never happen, but the discussion is good, the dialogue is good for bringing us together. And then there are those who say it can happen and someday it will happen.
Let me say what I mean by it, first of all. I'm not talking about reparations for people like me. I've been affected, of course, but I've done all right. I'm not talking about material reparations for people like me. I'm talking about people who have suffered intergenerationally, and just eking out a subsistence, and largely have been hobbled by this problem as it is socialized from one generation to the next. There ought to be some intervention. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about programs that money will buy, because you have to have an intervention at some level to correct what was done. You just can't shoot a victim and saying, I've shot the victim is not dead. I will not take the victim to the hospital, but I promise to stop shooting the victim. And walk away and say, that's enough. It's not enough. And we haven't done that in the case of any other group. You have to accept responsibility for what has happened. So in the areas of education and economic development, there needs to be that remedial intervention in the way of reparations. We became a wealthy country because of what we had done. We have to recall that, and we have to take responsibility for it.
And do you think we will?
I don't know. I didn't think we were going to get sanctions against South Africa in my lifetime. And I didn't think I had to believe that. I had to believe that I had to do my part and hand the baton on to the next generation. And so I was very surprised to see it happen in my lifetime. Sometimes when you work hard on things, good things happen.
Has the era of firsts in the African American community reached its apex at this date, 2010?
Probably not, and we probably make too much over it. We make big news events of these things, but they illustrate more than we think they do. They illustrate not just how much we're doing, but how much more we have to do. Societies are not described largely at the top. They're described in the middle, where the many millions of ordinary people live. How are they doing? How are they succeeding? That's the important thing. It's not the aberration that you should look at, not the exception, but the mainstream. And that's where the gulf remains in American society.
Randall Robinson, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Randall Robinson. Comcast subscribers can watch this program anytime on Penn State On Demand. Find out how through our website, conversations.psu.edu. You'll also find an excerpt from An Unbroken Agony. I'm Patty Satalia. Join us for our next Conversation from Penn State.
Production funding provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you. Thank you. This has been a production of WPSU. A copy of the program you've just seen can be purchased through Penn State Media Sales at mediasales.psu.edu or by calling 800-770-2111.